Hi everyone. This video is going to be a different one, and it's going to discuss race. So if you feel uncomfortable with this topic, I would suggest you click off and find another video to watch. You could stay here and hear an interesting or a different perspective and potentially learn something where a healthy conversation could potentially start. If you look at the title, it's clear that I'm going to be talking about Prince Naveen from The Princess and the Frog and his race/ethnicity, or his lack thereof. I don't see this being discussed much on YouTube, and it's something that's kind of close to my heart as a black male who is now talking about men and women in the future of animation, so I want to offer my insight on it. I will say that this video is not a character/masculinity analysis, and I'm sure I will eventually make one of him in the future, so these two are not mutually exclusive. Before I start this off, I want to state that I actually enjoy Naveen as a character. So, this video is not an attack on his character or his story arc throughout the movie. What this video is going to discuss and analyze is the choice to make him racially ambiguous, and for a film to make a big deal about being a big step for diversity in Walt Disney Animation Studios, since it is the first film to feature a black female main character and the first movie to tell a black story essentially. The Disney Princess line started in the early 2000s, and Tiana was the first one to be made after the lineup started, so having a black Disney princess was seen as a big deal since the company has relatively ignored black people throughout their films. People were excited for The Princess and the Frog, were excited for Tiana, and were excited for the prince. As the media press started taking place, and as people watched the movie, it was clear that Prince Naveen was not black, or it was not stated that he was black. But it's also clear that Prince Naveen was not white, or it wasn't stated that he was. No one knows what Prince Naveen is, but we do know that he is quote-unquote ethnic or quote-unquote orientalized by his accent, the fictional land of Maldonia being seen as worldly and distant, and he comes from a quote-unquote flavored place. Take that however you will. His voice actor, Bruno Campos, is a white Brazilian man, so it just causes a lot of confusion as to what he's supposed to be. Disney is not someone who does things on accident, like character designs and choosing the races of the characters or choosing who voices them. They are especially not going to take the character designs, racial connotations, and racial identification of the characters in a film that has the first black main character, and the one they were so proud to shout to anyone who would hear about. None of it's a coincidence. With all the confusion and how intentional Disney was with their confusion, it leads to one conclusion. Prince Naveen is racially ambiguous and was intentionally made to be so. But what is racial ambiguity? Racial ambiguity is the race, or other things like ethnicity, so on, that is hard to identify and define in a person. Naveen is intentionally designed to be more tan than the other Disney princess and other Disney male characters, and the other white characters in the movie, so he could blend in well with the black characters of the film, and could also easily be mistaken for black, especially in the 1920s New Orleans, where there was a huge Creole population. At the same time, his hair, which is somewhat wavy but somewhat smooth, eyes, which are very bright, skin, which is tanned but not too tanned, native tongue he uses, which is a conglomeration of several European languages, his name, which is associated with India, and titles of the area he comes from, Maldonia, which seems to be a play on of Macedonia, which is placed in Greece, are intentionally mismatched with a bunch of other places that are also not identified as black or Afro. His voice actor also being the base for a majority of his design, mainly his facial features, especially compared to the concept art, only furthers this confusion. Why is Prince Naveen's racial ambiguity being discussed, and why is it seen as a problem to some people? Again, The Princess and the Frog was made to be a big deal about having the first black female character and telling the story of and about a black person, and for black people to feel identified with and represented by one of the biggest companies ever. After 70 years of producing animated films, this is a good thing. Whenever there were other racial and ethnic minorities, outside of Pocahontas, which was based on a real story and the couple didn't end up together anyways, they had a leading man and a leading woman that is the same race, ethnicity, so on, and they get together. Aladdin and Jasmine represented a Middle Eastern / South Asian couple to the masses, and there was representation for that group, and there being representation for that group of people. Same thing with Mulan and Shang, representing an East Asian couple to the masses, and there being representation for that group of people. For the team at Disney to not take the same courtesy with the movie containing a black protagonist was confusing, especially with the racial connotations of not only the company, quite frankly, but America and the entire world as well, and wanting to brand themselves as an inclusive company who has left out black people not only in their animated products, but as workers behind the scenes, and honestly even in front of the camera as well. It's a disappointment. And using the excuse of, he's from a fictional area, doesn't really hold up, since they intentionally made the setting of this movie to take place in 1926 New Orleans, and it can't get any more real with that. So you're choosing to fictionalize other areas, but you're taking the setting for this film to be in a very real place. If the setting of the film was fictional to begin with, Prince Naveen's heritage coming from another fictional area wouldn't be a big deal and would honestly make more sense. I already mentioned how the other minority groups have a couple that represents that group of people, and even with Pocahontas getting with John Smith, there is an indigenous couple in Nani and David from Lilo and Stitch, an indigenous Hawaiian couple, I mean. And what makes it even worse is that they are most likely not going to make another black protagonist for years, most likely decades. So we might have to wait another 100 years to potentially have a prominent black couple. For a company that is so proud to talk about diversity, they don't have the best record of it in this regard. People come up with the offense of they don't want to offend anyone as an excuse. But how would a black woman getting with a black man be offensive to anyone? Was anyone offended when an Arabian woman got with an Arabian man? Was anyone offended when an Asian woman got with an Asian man? Was anyone offended when an indigenous woman got with an indigenous man? Do you know how suspicious at best and prejudiced at worst that sounds? And let's not even get into the endless amount of monoracial Caucasian couples that the company has produced and will continue to produce. What was the reason? Can anyone seriously come up with any? And if people want to say they did not run kingdoms in the 20th century, there are and / were several black kingdoms in Africa during that time, and they could have had a black prince if they really wanted to. In my personal opinion, they felt like a black man as a deuteragonist, being a love interest, and having a monoracial black couple was not profitable or marketable. But they also didn't want to alienate the race that they are using as inspiration for the film and are trying to feel like that group of people are being represented by in the film. I want to add a disclaimer here. There is nothing wrong with interracial relationships, and I am a massive supporter of interracial relationships in not only in animation, film, and television, but in my personal real life as well. Interracial relationships are not an issue, and people should love whoever loves and supports them, no matter what race they are. Arguments that I've heard about this topic is that interracial relationships deserve to be represented too, and the creators didn't want to piss off the people who potentially wanted to see Tiana with a white man or a non-black man. People are saying, but what about interracial representation? They deserve representation, but interracial representation has more representation than monoracial black representation. Pocahontas and John Smith were an interracial couple, and ignoring all the historical stuff, which is another topic for another day, an indigenous woman and a white man fell in love with one another. But the point of that story is that they were not fated to be together and have to go their separate ways. Esmeralda and Phoebus are an interracial couple, as she is a Romani woman with South Asian ties, and Phoebus is a white man. Very healthy and strong relationship these two have, where they respect one another, embrace one another's differences, but with their similarities, maturity, passion, righteousness, and good-heartedness, as well as snark, brought them together. Milo and Keita are another interracial couple, as Milo is a white man who ends up with Keita, who is ambiguously brown, which is another problem that has similar issues to Naveen, but not to the same magnitude, and I might discuss that in another video eventually as well. The issue with Milo and Keita is that she's not really given much racially or ethnically either, but she still has more than Naveen does. For an interracial couple to have such importance with their different races merging together, being seen as a positive thing, the races and ethnicities of both members of the couple should be defined, and Naveen doesn't even have that. If you didn't want to make him black, that's fine. You could have identified him as white, and a legitimate interracial relationship between that dynamic would have been representation. Same thing if he was identified as East Asian, South Asian, indigenous, biracial, or even being multi-generational mixed, which isn't the same thing as biracial, by the way. But none of that was even done. They wanted to market him to everybody without giving him any of that racial identity for anyone to connect with him on that level. Most people are not racially ambiguous, and it's okay to acknowledge and show that. It says a lot that in the late 2000s and early 2010s, Disney was afraid to identify a major character of theirs when we are supposed to be progressive. It was a hugely missed opportunity for minority representation, in my personal opinion. And even if you look at the interracial couples, it is always the POC woman falling in love with the Caucasian man. Keita, Esmeralda, and Pocahontas falling in love with Milo, Phoebus, and John Smith. You never see a Caucasian woman falling in love with a POC man. All of the Caucasian women in Disney's history are paired with a Caucasian man, almost to signal that their purity only deserves a Caucasian man, while a Caucasian man can handle a quote-unquote spicy or not fully pure POC woman. A POC woman could be deemed worthy enough to fall in love with or get with a very righteous Caucasian man, or in Tiana and Naveen's case, someone who could be easily identified as Caucasian if you really wanted to. And yes, you can be a Caucasoid Latino, by the way. According to Disney, black women and black men do not deserve one another, and black men do not deserve anyone. Or they're not going to show that as a company. And I don't even think they realize that's what they said, whether it was implicitly or explicitly. There are so many historical and racial connotations with how the setup is like, and how the hierarchy has formed throughout history and media. But I would be here forever explaining it, or trying to explain it. Now, people are going to ask, why does this matter? This movie is for kids. Mentioning race is making racism bigger. So on and so forth. That's what people are going to say. If you ignore race, it means that racism will go away. It matters because cartoons implicitly or explicitly tell a story, and not just the plot of the movie. Media sends a message, and it's never just about the outright message that is written or spoken through words. Disney is a huge media conglomerate, and a huge pop culture phenomenon like Disney that has been for a century now, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon, is going to tell implicit and explicit stories that don't involve the plot. Their characters are huge pop culture phenomenons on their own who are merchandised to death and discussed ad nauseum, to the point that people usually point to them as some of the most iconic characters, not even just in animation, but in film and medium. Especially for their archetype, stereotype, and racial group. When people think of indigenous characters in general, Pocahontas is going to come up. When people think of Arabic/South Asian characters in general, Aladdin and Jasmine are going to come up. When you look at couples in general, most Disney couples are going to come up. When you look at princesses or damsel in distresses, Snow White, Cinderella, and Aurora are going to come up. I can go on and on, but I think you all get the point. Some of these characters are almost 100 years old and are still set as the standard for a lot of the roles that they fill today. Is Prince Naveen supposed to come up when black characters come up in discussion? Is he supposed to come up when Latin characters come up in discussion? Arabic characters, South Asian characters, Mediterranean characters. He represents nothing, and the saddest part is that it was intentional. This film continued the perpetuation of the narrative that black couples and black love are not marketable, and instead of using this as an opportunity to show that every racial/ethnic group that black love is not scary or intimidating, and it's generally very beautiful, they continue to show that it was and isn't worth telling to the masses, and isn't worth being shown, which is so sad. And I already mentioned that they didn't even commit fully to the interracial relationship element like the other couples mentioned did either. Colorblindness is not always, and most often in general, not the way to go. Especially with something that was supposed to be as historic as this movie and as historic as the characters. As a black man, it is disappointing to see that after 80 years, people that are like me do not deserve to be represented as a major character by one of the biggest media conglomerates in the world. People like me do not deserve to have their story told of falling in love, whether with a woman like me, meaning black, or a woman in general. There is the saying that trying to please everyone just means you please no one, and that cannot be more accurate with this situation. Hopefully, a when instead of an if, but when you, Disney, the company, decide to tell another story featuring black characters, hopefully black love is included in it. But even if it's an interracial relationship, fully commit to it. I made this video not to slander the characters, voice actors, producers, directors, executives, storyboarders, animators, or anything like that on a personal level. I still like Prince Naveen, and I enjoy the film, but this topic is a main reason why many people in the black community do not feel attached to the movie, especially when they made such a big deal in praising the diversity that this film offers. 2 steps forward, but also 2.5 steps backwards as well. It seemed like the company wanted to be handed brownie points for doing the bare minimum with him, and with the movie in some elements, while not fully committing to representing good representation of racial minorities for this male character. But Raya and the Last Dragon came out 23 years after Mulan, so maybe we won't have to wait several decades to have another film by Walt Disney Animated Studios to tell another story with a black protagonist and to potentially have a black couple. Hopefully the people who watch this video understand my point of view, even if you don't agree with it personally yourself. Thank you for your time.